Hello, sorry I've been gone for so long. This is the Comparison Girl Adults version. I got sick and things got crazy, so I apologize for skipping out on y'all, but I'm back. And we are on the very last the very last chapter, which is chapter 6, lesson 3, seating requests. We're gonna start with reading. I want you to read Matthew 20 through 28, and it says, in 2006, the Barrick family was hit head-on by a drunk driver going 80 miles an hour. Their daughter, 15-year-old Jen, was not expected to live, but after a series of miracles, she survived. Jen now lives with a brain injury that has altered her life forever, but in the best way. Before the accident, Jen had prayed privately that Jesus would help her become bold. Today, she speaks of him with unbridled delight before thousands, telling of the miracles God has done. I've been in the audience and heard her pray. With you, Daddy, we know the best is yet to come. I had the privilege of meeting Jen and her mom, Linda, at a conference this year. In her sweet way, Linda said to a little group of us, "Why don't we find a place to pray together?" So behind a curtain, we got on our knees and lifted our requests to God. And there, in that circle, I told the Lord that I wanted what Jen has, her passionate joy and absolute trust. Yet I confessed I don't want the suffering that has delivered Jen to such a pure, heaven-minded focus. At one point I prayed, Lord, I surrender to you all that I hold dear, even my children. My voice cracked as I thought of all the Barrick family has endured, and my words trailed off. But Linda continued with strength and joy, praying, but Lord, we know that you have not given us a spirit of fear. We have nothing to fear when you are with us. It was such a precious reminder from a mama who has laid down many dreams for her family and endured what none of us would ever choose, but has come through the fire with a heart filled with wonder and joy. A mom on her knees. There was another mom who dropped to her knees before Jesus one day on the road to Jerusalem. It was Salome, the mother of James and John, and she had come to present a request. Salome clearly loved the Lord and was proud of her sons for following him, and her firm conviction that Jesus would one day sit on David's throne demonstrated beautiful faith. But I'm afraid Salome's intentions as she got to her knees were not to make herself small before Jesus. She had just the opposite in mind. Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right and one at your left, in your kingdom, she said to Jesus. Salome wanted her sons to be recognized, to have importance and influence and access to Jesus. She wanted them to achieve greatness, but she misunderstood what greatness was. Like her sons, she thought greatness involved being greater than the others. Just like comparison girls of today, Salome's perspective was skewed by the measure-up world that we're all a part of. And what's more, she was using anti-leverage to gain status. If you compare notes on the three women who were at the foot of Jesus' cross, you'll see that Salome is the sister of Mary, Jesus' mother, which means that she had Aunt Salome to Jesus, and that James and John are his cousins. So this isn't just a random woman kneeling to make a request. This is a woman who was trying to use her to make a seating request for her sons. And here is how Jesus responds to Aunt Salome. He says, "You do not know what you are asking." Matthew 20:22. It's because she was picturing thrones and honor, not crosses and prison cells for her precious boys. Those of us who are moms have such a longing for our children. We see their gifts and potential like nobody else does, and we dream of the ways God might use them for His glory. Yet as she pled with God to make our children great, like Salome, our own desires for greatness get braided in. This goes for our grandkids, mentees, friends as well. We attach our success to their status. When we kneel on behalf of ourselves or others, bringing to Jesus our request for kingdom greatness, we are a bit like Salome. We don't know what we're really asking for, because in the kingdom, when God calls a person to extraordinary greatness, he first empties her measuring cup in extraordinary ways. The way up is down. Jesus turned from Salome with a question for James and John. Are you able to drink this cup that I am to drink? He asked. They said, we are able. Matthew 20:22. But since they didn't know what they had asked, they also didn't know what they'd answered. Jesus, who had wrapped himself in human limitations, told them he couldn't be sure of the seating arrangements in heaven, but he did know one thing: his suffering would precede his glory, which is the very thing he had just been talking about. On the road to Jerusalem, he had pulled his disciples to the side for an object lesson, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem." But Jesus wanted his disciples to see that in the kingdom, the way down is up. Once they arrived in Jerusalem, he would be mocked, flogged, and crucified. Then on the third day, he'd rise again. Jesus used stark, frank language. He was teaching them the upside-down ways of the kingdom and using himself as an example. Yes, Jesus would be raised from the dead, but not before he was lowered into the grave. Yes, he would ascend to the highest throne, but not before he was devastatingly humbled on the cross. Philippians 2:8-9. In the kingdom, the way up is always down. Did they see? Enter Salome with some of the most cringeworthy timing ever. Somehow she thought this was the right moment to ask, can my boys be picked for those two most prestigious thrones? Oh, Salome, how I relate to you. I also have heard the story of the cross and tell Jesus I'm ready to follow. And I also get on my knees and beg him to make my children great for the kingdom. Perhaps God will choose one of my kids to stand out for standout purposes. But if that is true, it will be accompanied with a cup of bitter suffering to drink down. When I come to Jesus with eyes sparkling, saying, can my kid be picked for kingdom greatness? It's clear that, like Salome, I don't know what I'm asking. A cup of suffering. Nobody longs for suffering. Nobody thirsts for the cup that Jesus is about to drink. James and John certainly didn't. And even Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, prayed, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Matthew 26:39. Red letter comparison. Whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. On the side of that Jerusalem road, with Aunt Salome on her knees and his cousin bravely vowing to follow him to the bitter end, only Jesus could see what was up ahead. Did James and John truly want the position at his right and left? Because those spots would be occupied by two men hanging on two crosses. Jesus' cross would come before his throne, his bitter cup before glory. Once again, to help them understand the kingdom, Jesus gave another red letter comparison. Whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Matthew 20:27-28. Jesus, their leader, had come to serve. He was about to take a path with a sharp downward slope. In a short time, he would be a slave, in chains, with a cross on his back. Will James and John follow? Will they drink from Jesus' cup of suffering? Will they loyally give their lives? As the next chapters of their lives reveal, the answer is no, then yes. The night of Jesus' arrest, the disciples, including James and John, weren't even devoted enough to stay awake and pray. But then, by the power of the Spirit, both brothers put Jesus' great worth on display. by laying down their lives for his sake. Singled out for greatness. Some 14 years later, when Salome got the shocking news of her son James's death, cut short by Herod's sword, I wonder if she reflected back to that day on the road to Jerusalem. I wonder if she remembered how she had dropped to her knees and with sparkling eyes asked Jesus to take her seating request. It couldn't have been easy to hear about the perverse delight of the Jewish leaders and response to Herod's brutality towards her son. Acts 12:2-3. Did Salome drink Jesus' cup of suffering with the same faith that she first approached him? And did she return to her knees the day her John was taken in chains to Patmos because of his testimony about Jesus? Revelations 1:9. She had raised her boys to be strong men of principle, and she must have had inner strength herself. Did she remain true to her own convictions that Jesus would one day take his place on the throne? John was an old man by the time he wrote Revelations, telling of his privileged glimpse into heaven and Jesus' throne, so it's doubtful that Salome had the delight of reading it. But if she did somehow have the privilege of reading her boy's words, which have brought such brightness and hope to the people of God, imagine her tears of joy and honor. When Salome kneeled before Jesus, asking him to make her boys great, she had no earthly idea what she was asking or what would be asked of her. And we don't know either. We may dream of being singled out for kingdom greatness, but none of us thirst for a cup of suffering that precedes it. So here is what we must determine. Will we surrender to God's purposes for both ourselves and to the people we love? Will we willingly take our measuring cups and pour everything out? Here was Salome's reality. She suffered greatly and would be rewarded. Mark 10:29-30. Her sons also suffered, but one day she would see them sitting on heaven's thrones. Matthew 5:11-12 and 19:28. Salome's suffering was temporary, and it can't compare to the glory she experienced when Jesus established his kingdom. The same, dear sister, is true for you. Has God asked you to humble yourself in extravagant ways? How has he used this for his glory? Read Romans 8:18, 26-30. Choose a phrase that brings you comfort and write it in your journal several times. Read Revelations 21:1-14, keeping in mind that this was written by John. What perspective does this give to your current hopes and sorrows? What significance do you think verse 12 had for John? Get on your knees before the Lord and surrender your ideals of greatness for yourself, your children, or others. To him, say as Jesus did, not my will, but yours be done. Romans 8:18. The suffering of this present time are not worth comparing the glory that is to be revealed to us. Extraordinary kingdom greatness will involve emptying my measuring cup in extraordinary ways. Lord, I want to surrender my ideals of greatness for myself and others. Help me to drink the cup of suffering you set before me, knowing that with you there is nothing to fear. I love you guys, and I'm always here for you, even after this Bible study is over as we wrap it up. Always here. I know.